Twins born with profound deformities. What are the consequences when siblings marry? The biological fallout from unions between close relatives remains one of the most harrowing chapters in human history, particularly when repeated across generations. Nestled deep within the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia lay a community the world had left behind. The year was 1937. America was still reeling from the Great Depression. While its cities showed faint signs of revival, the remote valleys and rugged slopes of the Appalachians existed in a separate reality, where families clung to traditions centuries old. Among these lineages were the Blackwoods. Having settled the region in the late 1700s when the first European pioneers pushed through the mountains, the Blackwoods were known for their fierce seclusion. As years turned into decades, they stayed while others migrated toward urban opportunity, becoming a genetic island unto themselves. The Blackwood clan was always regarded with deep suspicion by folks in the nearby towns, reports Dr. Thomas Harrison, a University of West Virginia historian who spent decades studying the region's isolated communities. They descended from their mountain only to trade furs and crafts for essentials. Matrimony within the family became standard practice, not by deliberate design, but through geographical and social inevitability. The Blackwood property was a sealed world. A single, winding dirt road provided the only access, making visitors a rarity, especially during the brutal mountain winters. The heart of the settlement was the main house, a two-story wooden structure raised by the original patriarch, Isaiah Blackwood, and later expanded to accommodate the growing clan. Smaller cabins for various branches of the family dotted the land around it. Sarah and Joseph Blackwood, first cousins, wed in 1915. Like countless kin before them, they perceived no wrongdoing in their union. To them, it was merely the continuation of a family tradition. Their first children were born without obvious issues, though some displayed shorter stature and mild learning difficulties. Then, in 1929, as the Great Depression dawned, Sarah gave birth to twins, Elellanena and Edward. From the first moment, it was clear something was terribly wrong. The local doctor, a rare visitor to the community, was summoned in urgency. What he witnessed left him deeply shaken, as recorded in his medical diary, discovered years later. I have never encountered such deformities in newborns. The infants exhibit severe cranial malformations with abnormally large heads. Their upper limbs are stunted, and both seem incapable of normal feeding. I do not expect them to survive more than a few days. I strongly suspect the cause is the parents' consanguineous union, compounded by generations of marriages between close relatives. Defying all medical expectations, Eleanor and Edward survived. In the years that followed, they displayed severe developmental delays, never achieving basic milestones like sitting, crawling, or speaking. Their heads continued to grow at an alarming rate while their bodies remained frail and stunted. The condition of the Blackwood twins was likely a severe form of hydrocephalus combined with other genetic anomalies resulting from prolonged inbreeding, explains Dr. Melissa Carter, a geneticist at Johns Hopkins University. When close relatives reproduce, it drastically increases the probability that harmful recessive genes will be expressed. Across multiple generations, these effects can be catastrophic. The twins' birth marked a turning point for the family. Sarah sank into a profound depression, unable to reconcile her children's condition. Joseph, in turn, retreated further into isolation, forbidding any contact with the outside world. It was within this crucible of extreme seclusion and mounting pressure that an event occurred which would forever alter the Blackwoods' fate, something so disturbing it remained a whispered secret in neighboring communities for decades. By 1937, the 8-year-old twins required constant care. Unable to walk or communicate, they were entirely dependent on their relatives. This relentless burden bred increasing tension between Sarah and Joseph, their arguments growing more frequent and intense. On a bitterly cold January night, as a snowstorm sealed the property off from the world, a quarrel between the couple escalated to unprecedented heights. Shouts echoed through the main house, rousing other family members. "This isn't natural. Look at them. Look what we've done." Sarah was heard screaming, according to later accounts from a nephew. The next morning, when the storm finally broke, a scene of horror awaited the family. Sarah and the twins were gone. Only tracks in the fresh snow led toward the edge of a nearby cliff. What transpired that night endures as one of the Blackwood family's darkest episodes, a tragic testament to the devastating consequences of decades of consanguineous marriage. Ensure you are subscribed to this channel. The truth about isolated family lineages in rural America is revealed here with historical and scientific detail you won't find elsewhere. Your subscription is essential for us to continue investigating these cases that history attempted to erase. The story of the Blackwood family neither began nor ended with the tragedy of Sarah and her twins. To fully comprehend what led to that fateful winter night in 1937, we must journey further back in time. Patriarch Isaiah Blackwood arrived in the Appalachians in 1792, fleeing accusations of heterodox practices in New England. A taciturn and deeply suspicious man, Isaiah believed the outside world was corrupt, and that only in isolation could his family preserve what he termed spiritual and physical purity. Isaiah Blackwood exemplifies a leader who used isolation as an instrument of control, states Dr. Rebecca Johnson, an anthropologist specializing in closed communities. Historical records suggest he had been expelled from 3 different communities before finding refuge in the mountains, each time for imposing extreme views on familial segregation. In personal notes discovered in a hidden chest in the 1970s, Isaiah wrote, "Our bloodline must remain pure, untainted by outsiders. Our strength depends on it." This distorted ideology was passed down as unquestionable dogma. By the 3rd generation, the Blackwoods seldom married outside the family. Unions between cousins became standard, and occasionally, even closer relationships occurred. Problems began to emerge gradually. By the 1850s, local documents noted that Blackwood children exhibited concerning peculiarities: shorter statures, vision problems, and cognitive delays. The family attributed these to divine trials or curses, never questioning their matrimonial customs. What we observe is a textbook case of how isolation can foster genetically hazardous practices, states Dr. Howard Miller, a Princeton University geneticist. The effects of inbreeding are cumulative. A single generation of cousin marriage may have minimal impact, but when repeated over 5, 6, or 7 generations, the risk of serious genetic anomalies increases exponentially. Returning to Joseph and Sarah, first cousins and direct descendants of 6 generations of consanguineous unions, the stage was set for a genetic catastrophe. When Sarah became pregnant for the 3rd time in 1928, she had already borne 2 children showing mild effects: Michael, who had 6 fingers on each hand, and Ruth, who had learning difficulties. The twin pregnancy was exceptionally difficult. Sarah endured severe nausea and gained little weight. The delivery, during a snowstorm that prevented the doctor's arrival, was assisted only by elder women of the family. Eleanor was born first, Edward followed 20 minutes later. The shock was immediate. Beyond their grossly enlarged heads, the babies had multiple deformities: widely spaced eyes, cleft lips, and fused fingers. More disturbing was their mirroring effect. Elellanina's deformities were more pronounced on her right side, Edward's on his left. This phenomenon is known as genetic complementarity, particularly concerning in twins from consanguineous unions, explains Dr. Carter. It's as if the compromised genetic material was distributed between the 2 fetuses, creating mirrored malformations. It is extremely rare but documented in medical literature, especially in genetically isolated populations. As they grew, their conditions grew more challenging. At 3, they could not sit unsupported. At 5, they had developed no comprehensible speech, though they understood simple commands. Most disturbing was their profound connection. When separated, even by a wall, they became intensely agitated, emitting distressing screams until reunited. This depth of bond is common in monozygotic twins, but with compromised neurological development, it can manifest even more intensely, observes Dr. William Tennant, a pediatric neurologist who later studied the scant medical records. Reports suggest Elellanena and Edward may have shared a nonverbal communication incomprehensible to others. The twins' condition deteriorated. By 7, Edward suffered frequent seizures. Elellanena developed severe scoliosis, further limiting her mobility. The burden of their care fell chiefly on Sarah, while Joseph spent more time away in the fields or hunting. A distant cousin, Daniel Blackwood, who occasionally delivered supplies, left a chilling account in his diary dated November 1936, visited Joseph and Sarah today. The situation worsens with each visit. The children are larger, more difficult to manage, yet just as dependent. Sarah is a ghost of herself, eyes sunken and empty. When I suggested taking the twins to a specialist in Charleston, Joseph exploded. "No outsider will lay hands on my children," he shouted. "I fear for what may happen in that house." The nearest neighbors, the Pattersons, reported hearing screams from the Blackwood property with increasing frequency that winter. Once, Martha Patterson found Sarah wandering alone in the forest, muttering incoherently. She was repeating something about cleansing the blood and ending the suffering, Martha later reported. "I tried to lead her home, but she refused. I should have insisted. Perhaps I could have prevented what came after." The winter of 1937 was one of the most severe on record. Successive snowstorms further isolated the reclusive family. It was within this context of extreme isolation, unbearable psychological pressure, and absent support that disaster became inevitable. The morning after the disappearance dawned clear and bitterly cold. The snow had ceased, leaving an immaculate white blanket over the property. Joseph's younger brother, Thomas, was first to notice the tracks leading from the house toward the cliff known as Devil's Leap, an 80-meter drop onto rocky riverbeds below. "Something is wrong," Thomas told his brother in the kitchen. "Sarah and the children are gone. There are tracks heading to the cliff." A frantic search ensued. Joseph, Thomas, and two cousins followed the clear trail, a set of adult footprints accompanied by drag marks, suggesting Sarah had carried or dragged the helpless twins. The tracks ended abruptly at the cliff's edge. There were no signs of struggle, only a patch of compacted snow, as if someone had stood there for a long time. "She stood here," Joseph murmured, kneeling. "She stood here looking down." The search for bodies began immediately, but conditions were nearly impossible. The river was partially frozen, its banks choked with snow, and the terrain perilously steep. 3 days later, they found little Edward's body, trapped between rocks half a kilometer downstream. Preserved by the cold, his eyes were open, staring at the gray sky. Elellanena was found the next day, farther down, nearly buried in snow on the riverbank. Sarah was missing for another 2 weeks. Her discovery was a shock. She was not in the river but in a small cave on the cliff face, 20 meters below the summit. Somehow, she had survived the fall and dragged herself to this shelter before succumbing to her injuries and the extreme cold. Most disturbing was what they found with her, a diary protected in a waterproof bag, containing her final words. The pages were stained with blood and tears, but the text was legible. "May God forgive me for what I have done. I could no longer bear to see my angels suffer. Each day was worse. Edward had 3 seizures yesterday. Elellanena will not stop crying. I know it is our fault. The blood is cursed. Generations of sin have led us here. I tried to love my children as best I could, but love is not enough against what we have done. Now I understand what my grandmother tried to tell me before I married Joseph. The blood needs new life," she said. "But I did not listen. No one listened. And now my babies pay the price. There is no hope for them in this world. I can only pray they find peace in the next. May God have mercy on our souls." Local authorities investigated, but in such isolated communities in the late 1930s, family tragedies rarely received more than a cursory examination. The official verdict was accidental death, though everyone knew it was a clear case of maternal despair culminating in an unimaginable tragedy. Joseph Blackwood never recovered. In the following months, he withdrew completely, often sleeping in the twins' empty room. Neighbors reported hearing him speak as if the children were still present. The Blackwood story represents one of the most extreme examples of prolonged inbreeding's impact, states Dr. Miller. What makes it particularly tragic is that unlike some communities that practice consanguinity for cultural reasons, the Blackwoods were victims of geographical isolation and their founders' paranoia, leading to generations of practices with devastating consequences. If your heart aches from this story, you are not alone. Leave in the comments, "The blood needs new life." This phrase from Sarah's grandmother holds a powerful scientific truth many isolated communities learned too late. Your comment helps sustain this vital discussion on the risks of consanguinity. The Blackwood twins case might have remained a local tragedy if not for the arrival of someone who would change the understanding of that isolated community. In September 1937, 8 months after the tragedy, a young doctor named Robert Carlson arrived in the nearby town of Millerville. Freshly graduated from Johns Hopkins, Carlson had chosen rural work as part of a New Deal program to bring medical aid to remote regions. Curious and idealistic, Dr. Carlson soon heard rumors about the Mountain family and their strange children. He initially dismissed them as superstition, but while treating a Patterson for pneumonia, he heard first-hand accounts of the Blackwoods and the recent tragedy. As a physician, I cannot ignore what appears a clear case of severe genetic issues, he wrote in his professional diary. If tales of generations of intermarriage are true, this family represents a significant scientific case study, as well as a human tragedy potentially avoidable with proper medical intervention. Unknowingly, Dr. Carlson's arrival marked the start of one of the most comprehensive studies on consanguinity ever conducted in the United States. With patients, he built a relationship with more accessible family members, like Joseph's brother, Thomas. His efforts to gain their trust were extraordinary, comments Dr. Elizabeth Winters, a medical historian at Columbia University. He demonstrated remarkable sensitivity, offering help without judgment. Carlson's records, later published in the American Journal of Human Genetics in 1952, with names changed, reveal a slow process of discovery. Initially, he obtained permission to examine some of the family's children. His findings were alarming. Of 17 children examined, 14 had physical or cognitive anomalies, fused fingers, syndactyly, underdeveloped jaws, micrognathia, severe strabismus, partial deafness, and varying intellectual impairments. Nearly all were significantly shorter than average. The pattern is consistent with multiple generations of inbreeding, he wrote. The problems are clearly the result of harmful recessive genes expressing themselves, genes that would remain dormant in a diverse population. With Thomas's help, Carlson accessed the complete family history, using parish records and oral accounts to reconstruct a family tree documenting 7 generations of consanguineous marriages, including unions between first cousins and at least 2 between uncle and niece. What Carlson documented was an involuntary human genetic experiment, explains Dr. Miller. In such isolation, the frequency of recessive diseases increases drastically. Normally, a person needs 2 copies of a deleterious gene to manifest a condition. When parents share recent ancestors, the probability they carry the same harmful genes skyrockets. The twins, Elellanena and Edward, represented the extreme endpoint of this phenomenon. Based on descriptions, modern specialists believe they suffered a rare combination of congenital hydrocephalus, craniocenosis, premature closure of cranial sutures, and other malformations from deleterious recessive genes. The most tragic aspect is that this was not a biological inevitability, but the direct result of social practices that could have been avoided, states Dr. Johnson. Geographical isolation was compounded by self-imposed seclusion, turning a circumstantial tendency into a devastating family dogma. Joseph Blackwood, still shattered, initially refused to speak with Dr. Carlson. It was only in 1939, nearly 2 years later, that he agreed. Carlson's notes from their meeting are poignant. Met with JB today at his home. The man appears to have aged 20 years in 2, completely grey, hunched, distant gaze. The house is in disarray. When I mentioned discussing the risks of cousin marriage, he initially shut down. After a long silence, he spoke of the twins. They had my eyes, he said, even if they couldn't speak properly. Edward laughed just like my father. Can you imagine, doctor, seeing your own father in the eyes of a child who can barely lift his head? And Elellanena, she held my finger with such strength. When I asked if he knew cousin marriage could cause problems, he replied, my parents were cousins. Their parents, too. Everyone seemed normal. How could I have known? This is the fundamental tragedy, ignorance passed down through generations, combined with isolation and distrust. When I tried to explain heredity, he stopped me. It is too late for me, doctor, but perhaps not for the others. Talk to my brother. Talk to the young ones. And that is what Dr. Carlson did. 4 years, he worked tirelessly with the younger Blackwoods, educating them on the risks of inbreeding and helping them connect with neighboring communities. His work extended beyond the Blackwoods, identifying other isolated Appalachian families with similar, if less extreme, patterns. The 1940s brought change. World War II and industrialization drew mountain youth to cities. Better roads reduced isolation. Electricity arrived. Crucially, medical knowledge became more accessible. Change was gradual but significant. Thomas became a vocal advocate against relative marriage, sharing his family's history as a warning. Several young Blackwoods married outside the family, introducing vital genetic diversity. Joseph never fully recovered. He lived as a recluse until his death in 1952 at 64. In his final years, he allowed Carlson to document the full family history on the condition that real names be changed. Joseph understood, too late for his own family, that their story could save others. Carlson wrote after their last meeting. He told me, "Tell the truth, doctor. Tell it so no one else goes through what we did." The Blackwood legacy extends far beyond their personal tragedy. Carlson's study, Effects of Prolonged Consanguinity in Isolated Appalachian Populations, became a benchmark in medical literature on population genetics. Though anonymized, the data provided invaluable insights into heredity and the specific risks of recurrent consanguinity. Carlson's work was pioneering, states Dr. James Wilson, a professor of medical genetics at Harvard University. In an era before genome mapping, he documented inheritance patterns and clearly demonstrated how certain conditions manifest with increased frequency in consanguineous lineages. Carlson's data showed that in the Blackwood family, the incidence of congenital anomalies was approximately 17 times higher than in the general population. The most common conditions included polydactyly, extra fingers 23%, syndactyly, fused fingers 18%, microcephaly, abnormally small head 12%, hydrocephalus, 7%, intellectual disability, tilde 45%, congenital deafness, 19%, cardiac malformations, 14%. What makes Carlson's study so valuable is that he tracked the family over a decade, documenting how introducing new genes through outside marriages began reducing these conditions in subsequent generations, explains Dr. Carter. Indeed, for children born between 1940 to 1955, the incidence of congenital anomalies dropped dramatically. Of 28 children, only 6 had any previously common conditions, and these were milder. The Blackwood story transcended medicine, becoming a case study for anthropologists, sociologists, and historians examining isolated communities and the impact of cultural beliefs. What happened wasn't just individual choice, but a complex interplay of geography, belief, and lack of scientific access, observes Dr. Johnson. It makes one wonder how many other isolated communities worldwide face similar problems today. Modern studies have identified several global populations where consanguineous marriages remain common, often due to tradition or isolation. In some, first-cousin marriage rates reach 20 to 50% of all unions. Modern science lets us understand and quantify these risks precisely, explains Dr. Wilson. We know a one-off first-cousin marriage increases the risk of congenital anomalies by about 4 to 7% above baseline. This risk, while significant, is manageable with genetic counseling. The true danger emerges with repeated generations of such marriages, as with the Blackwoods. The fate of the Blackwood property mirrored the family's change. The main house, where Joseph lived out his years, was abandoned after his death and eventually collapsed. The lands were divided and sold by descendants, many of whom moved to urban areas. In 1972, Thomas Blackwood Jr., Joseph's nephew and one of the first family members to earn a university degree, established the Blackwood Foundation for Genetic Studies. Using funds from land sales, the foundation supports research on rare genetic diseases and offers free genetic counseling to families in isolated rural areas. It is our way of transforming family tragedy into something positive, Thomas Jr. declared in a 1975 interview. If the knowledge from our suffering can prevent others from the same fate, then some good will have come from it. The twins, Elellanena and Edward, whose brief, difficult lives catalyzed such change, were buried in the small family cemetery. For decades, their graves were marked by simple stones. In 1997, on the 60th anniversary of their deaths, family descendants erected a granite monument inscribed, *Elellanena and Edward Blackwood, 1929 to 1937. Their brief lives brought light to what was in the shadows. May their legacy be knowledge and understanding. Dr. Robert Carlson worked in the Appalachians until his retirement in 1965. His study of the Blackwoods and others led to educational programs for isolated communities, addressing consanguinity and other health issues. In 1983, a PBS documentary titled Isolated Lineages, The Genetics of the Mountains presented an anonymous version of the story, winning an Emmy and spurring improvements in rural health services. The Blackwood story, though deeply tragic, is a powerful example of how scientific knowledge can transform destinies, concludes Dr. Winters. What began as a narrative of ignorance and isolation became a catalyst for education and change. It reminds us that even in the darkest circumstances, there is potential for learning and growth. Today, Blackwood descendants are scattered across the country, many unaware of their full history. Those who do know carry not only the memory of tragedy but also pride in how their family eventually embraced knowledge to transform its legacy. As Dr. Carlson observed in his final notes, human history is full of examples of how ignorance can lead to suffering, but equally abundant are examples of how knowledge can redeem even the darkest chapters of our lives. The Blackwoods exemplify both. If you have watched until now, you appreciated this story. Leave a comment saying, "I watched until here," so I can get to know you and identify who truly enjoys the narratives on this channel. Do not forget to like and share this video with those who might be interested in these hidden stories of American society. Your subscription is fundamental for us to continue revealing these cases that history tried to forget. Science and history have much to teach us about the consequences of practices like consanguinity, and it is our duty to bring these lessons to light.